I define freedom as living authentically as me. And so for that to happen, I had to figure out who the me was. So freedom to me is taking back what was stolen, like I said earlier, which is our life, our breath, and our bodies.
Hey everybody, welcome to another fabulous episode of Town Hall, a Black Queer podcast with my co-host Bob the Drag Queen and me, Peppermint. This is the podcast where we journey through a theme by sharing stories, music, poetry, and art of varying depth and hilarity. Today's episode is To Freedom! Part
Yes,
2.
Pep, you got it. You got it. And today we're really focusing on abolition, which is such an interesting term. I think when people hear the word abolitionist, they think specifically like someone who was against American chattel slavery specifically. But as we discussed in the former episode, no one is more hopeless than slaves, and one falsely believes they're free. And we are still enslaved to many, many, many things. Um, and abolition work is never, ever, ever ending to be an abolitionist.
I think one of the things that was really interesting and great to hear when we interviewed Dr. Angela Davis was how she described as a part of her identity at being an abolitionist. And since over the past handful of years, a lot of the people that I've come to follow and admire and connect with who've described themselves as abolitionists, that work has moved over to the prison industrial complex in terms of prison abolition. And, there is a connection between chattel slavery and the prison and
I would
prison.
love to read to you all. I would love to read to you all the 13th Amendment. I don't know if people have ever, but if you ever want to, I would tell people if you ever want to read the Declaration of Independence, it is a really short read, y'all. I mean, it's like a page. It's a genuinely and incredibly short read, and you can read it in practically
I've read it.
no time flat. Same with the amendments. And the 13th Amendment.
We all got copies of it in Pennsylvania.
Oh, did you?
Independence Hall. Yeah. If you're Pennsylvanian, you have quite a connection to Independence Day, Independence Hall, the Liberty Bell.
Obviously. Yeah, that makes sense.
And the Declaration of Independence.
So this is the 13th Amendment. Neither slavery nor involuntary servitude. Now, this is where it gets real devious. This next word I'm about to say is nasty work. Neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except as a punishment for crime, whereof the parties shall have been duly convicted, shall exist within the United States or any place subject to their jurisdiction. So what that means is slavery was never abolished. It was just conditionalized. Nope. Like, you can be a slave if we think you're bad. If we think you're bad, you should be a slave.
And it was even more than that, because it wasn't even things that everybody agreed were wrong. It was literally like walking on the wrong side of the street, looking at the wrong person, being out of this, being in an area that they didn't want you to. And it wasn't even written laws that were necessarily that we all agreed on the laws and we wrote them up. These were just offending people who were deputized. They deputized regular citizens and said, you as a white person have the authority to take a Black person who had been freed from slavery, emancipated, and you can make them a slave again by just saying, oh, he offended me. Now let's arrest him. And now they're back in the system. And once that happens, you ain't getting out.
Yeah, once you're in the system, it's hard to get out of the system. And, obviously, Black people were being governed by a completely different set of laws than white people were being governed by. And those effects are still very much alive today. I strongly recommend everyone look up the history of the police and how the police in America started. I would do a horrible job explaining, but essentially, short answer is police started as slave catchers. The cops that you see today started in America, specifically in America, as slave catchers.
It's not only the police; it's also the system that we think of as punishment via like a jail or a prison is an American thing as well. Because initially, people would go become punished and be sort of put away for certain crimes. But it was usually the crimes were connected to behavior and behavioral and mental illness. Things that people would get a diagnosis for these days. They weren't able to do that back in Europe, because we really transferred the European way, the English way of society and culture and penalization to America. And we just basically adopted all the same customs that they had. And so if somebody was crazy, they would do something or maybe expose themselves or steal something. Or so being poor and not mentally well were intertwined
Yep.
in a way that they would just basically put everybody in an asylum. That was the punishment, as they would either put you to death or put you in a big old throw you away and put you in basically a room where everybody was just like in there. If you've ever seen those movies, where they're person's in a jail / mental institution, and there's just people running around and moaning and groaning, and it seems like there's no supervision.
Like One
That's
Flew Over the Cuckoo Nest.
One flew over exactly. But that's even a more modern way of that. But yes, if anybody's seen 12 Monkeys, and that was basically what people had for their jail or prison, until we had this new system of penalization in the states, where everyone was deputized. There were suddenly more people with the job of becoming slave catchers, and it was for the sake of protecting property. Everyone didn't have property to protect when there was a king and a monarchy. That wasn't even a need until before the people that would enforce the laws were working for the monarchy or the king, and that was to collect the taxes and to take property from people. And so when people started getting their own ability to have their own property, their own land here, and their own workers were people that were working on that land, suddenly they had so many more things that they needed to protect: their own money, their own property, the people that were their property. And so, yeah, slave catchers were just, they gave them a badge, and now that's the modern day police.
And not to mention, a lot of when they lock you up and put you in this big room, unless they felt like you had something that could really, really benefit them, and then they would basically give you back to a slave owner, and you to be their private property. I really recommend you all look into Blind Tom Wiggins. Tom Wiggins was a person on the autism spectrum who was a slave, but he was he could play any instrument. He couldn't speak. He was pre-verbal. He had what some people would consider today pre-verbal autism, which is where he can say things, but it's all stuff that he's hearing being said. But his version of it was he could allegedly what his big feat was he was this like black person who could recite like 10 minutes of Shakespearean monologue. He could do like 8 minutes of French. Didn't speak French, but if you spoke to him in French, he would just do it in like he would mimic your voice perfectly. He wouldn't have an accent. He would just be like, wow, this slave can speak German, French, uh Chinese, any language. He can play any instrument that he hears. He just has the ability. And when the Emancipation Proclamation was signed, they were like, well, this guy can't possibly take care of himself. Look at him. How's he gonna take care of himself? His family be damned. We'll take care of him, and we will create a show, and we will sell tickets, and people will come, and they will enjoy Tom Wiggins. But also we're feeding him. We're not paying him. No, why would we pay him? He's literally like not mentally well. We're not gonna pay him, but he is gonna make money, and he'll have a better life with us. So it was quite common for like if they would capture someone, if the slave catcher would capture someone, and they were like, he's crazy or he's dangerous, but he is big and strong. I bet he could break rocks. I bet he could build a railroad. I bet he could build a house. I bet he could carry feed. So
I
since
just
we
think
were
there was
free-
probably no way for people to think of Black folks in this country as anything other than people who should be working for no money.
unless
Like
you were able
regardless
to
of whether you
acclimate.
were, you know,
Unless you're able to acclimate, like
whether
someone like a W.B. Du Bois or someone like Frederick Douglass, Um,
Hmm.
it would
Well,
be it'd be hard for
that
them
was
to.
after slavery, though.
Yeah, but he was alive during slavery. So Frederick Douglass was a slave. So
Right.
it'd be hard to enslave or to capture or to criminalize or
Oh,
Frederick
you're talking about
Douglass.
after people have been
Yeah,
emancipated.
because they're like, well, Frederick Douglass is kind of like he talks like us. He looks like he doesn't look like us, but he is
Hmm.
he is quote unquote well spoken. Which, by the way, if you're a white person listening, there's a reason why black people do not like the compliment well spoken. It doesn't matter how well spoken a black person is. A lot of black people do not like the compliment. My God, you're so well spoken. You speak English so well. I'm like, what's my first language? What other fucking language are we speaking? What you know what I mean? It's just loaded. It carries a lot of history behind it that maybe you would understand if you didn't have the same experience. You know?
Yeah. 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 Um, I I do. It is really interesting um, how much of this information not only has been kept from us or like sort of this is American history that what we're talking about right now. And it's wild to me that what we learn about as history, I mean, granted, they can't teach you everything. There's probably for every story about Willie, there's probably 100, that are similar and that we don't hear about. And we may never hear about. Now, it's different these days because we can access information more readily. You can post information that will get out and sort of self-publish in a way that people weren't able to do, you know, years ago. And so we do have access to these things, thank goodness. But it is interesting that so many of these things were really like kept under wraps and sort of
Mhm.
whitewashed out of the books. And now it's all sort of coming to light. It all sort of seems like the facade is crumbling in a
Yeah.
way.
Oh, for sure. And to be an abolitionist in the 1800s or 1700s was a lot different than being an abolitionist today. I mean, there's a famous abolitionist named John Brown. If you ever heard the song John Brown's body lie emulging in the grave. John Brown was considered a very crazy abolitionist, and he was the type of abolitionist who would so a lot of people cite that John Brown is the reason why the Civil War started. His death um at the artillery. What do you call it? Artillery, where they keep all the artillery, where they keep all the weapons. Yeah.
And
Where
yeah.
he tried to take over the artillery, the national artillery, but he did not succeed. But John Brown was like, he was one of those pro slavers who was like, he was a white man, and he was very, 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 very religious, and he felt convicted by God. And when someone feels like they have permission from God, baby, you can't tell them anything. They have permission by the highest authority in the universe. So who the hell are you? So John Brown, there were accounts of John Brown going up to people and just straight up asking the question, "Are you pro slavery or are you pro free state?" And if you answered not to his liking, he would literally kill you where you stood, like sight unseen, where you stand, that would be the last breath you ever draw in your life. Boom to the
Asking
head.
who, black folks or white folks?
Anybody, mostly white people. But he also famously killed a judge and his family for ruling in a way that he did not think God saw fit to pro free state. Um and there's an interesting book. It's historical fiction. It's not there's true stuff in it, but it's historical fiction. It's called The Good Lord Bird, and I believe it's written by Gregory McBride. I can't. We're gonna look it up right now. But there's also a TV show starring Daveed Diggs and E-
David Diggs. Oh yeah, I
and
know him.
uh
Mhm.
and Ethan Hawke, maybe, on Showtime. I cannot. His name is James McBride. Thank you. Gregory McBride wrote Wicked. James McBride. Thank you. Um, and I can't vouch for the TV show as well as I can vouch for the book. It is a really, really good book. It's actually the last book I actually read by hand without like listening to it or reading it on like iPad. It's the last book I actually held in my hands and actually read the book.
And so, what did you get from it?
Oh, it's just a really really good book. It's to give you the elevator pitch. It's about John Brown killed some abolitionists, I mean, some slavers, and in the process, a slave was killed as well. And then
Mm,
the slave's child was there, the slave's daughter was there, and he was like, "Well, now I
mhm.
have to take care of you. He kidnapped this child." He was like, "Well, you don't have a parent now. You're now with me.
Got it.
You're gonna join my band, my guerrilla army, basically."
Mhm,
And then this little girl actually wasn't a little girl; it was a little boy. He thought this child was a girl because he was wearing a dress. And then
mhm.
this little boy has to live as a girl because he's afraid of John Brown finding out that he's a boy and thinking that
Wow, that is deep.
he's wicked. It's a really interesting book.
Did they join? Did they? And but were they? Did the little child get on board with the abolition
Oh,
vibe?
I mean, reluctantly, yes. His name is Onion. Reluctantly, Onion does join the group of misfits and abolitionists, because he doesn't have a choice because has no parents
A
now,
child.
and he's he just is with this group.
But did Onion grow up to become also an abolitionist, or no? Something left.
Ooh, I haven't read the book in a while, to be honest, but I know that
Mm,
Onion ends up falling in love, but everyone thinks he's a
that's
girl,
wild.
and he has to live as a girl,
I
but
want
then
to hear about Onion.
he starts going through puberty,
I gotta
and
look this up.
it's a really
Uh,
good book. 10 out of 10
but
recommend.
that's the thing that there's so many stories. I mean, that's a fiction.
Yeah,
You
yeah.
said
I mean, the Onion is
okay.
a fictional character, but John Brown is a real person.
Oh, um, but there's. I mean, I think of John Brown. You think of Nat Turner
Mhm.
and the Nat Turner Rebellion. Where there's so many stories of people, enslaved folks, people all over the world resisting, oppression and dehumanization at its most despicable depths. And the thought of, is it, what is, I don't want to say collateral damage, but like what, you know when I think of the Nat Turner Rebellion and how so many women and children were killed, in white women and children, but then a bunch of also women and children and enslaved folks, everybody was killed, um, were killed during this rebellion, fighting back against slavery and trying to free themselves. You ask, like, is what is this just? Is this something? You may not have asked that, but one might ask, what does it take to fight for freedom? And what, does taking someone else's life, is it worth it? Is it in within the is it permissible? And it's a
Yeah.
wild question to ask, but you also think about like what happened in Haiti when the Haitians overthrew the French slavers, um, and they were also killing women and children and babies of their slavers, of their captors, to gain freedom, because it's the only thing that they were able to do left. And of course, the response to that was, "Oh, they're so barbaric. How dare they kill?" Oh, pearl clutching, not even acknowledging how many women and children were killed, beaten, and raped probably on the daily.
Yeah,
You know,
it begs some people, some might say, if you can kill women and children and innocent men to enslave us, then why can't we kill women, children, and innocent men to free
to get
ourselves?
the freedom.
You know what I
Yeah.
mean? It's like how, like, are you supposed to just beg and say please?
I don't know. Yeah. Well, yeah, that's the thing. It's kind of reminds me. It makes me think when they say you should not fight back against the people who are harming you. First, they'll say no one's harming you, and what's happening to you is not harm. And then they say, but if you try to fight back, then then you're doing it in the wrong way by today's standards, and that they just lay some sort of respectability politics onto it and be like, oh well, that's not the way to do it. Don't do it that way. But it's all for the effort of serving and perpetuating, keeping this going, which is like I feel like the next thing we're going to hear is some, an, another psychological disorder saying, "Oh, you're crazy if you try to get freedom," you know.
Yeah, I mean, they tell us we're crazy if you don't like Trump. You have Trump derangement syndrome. They'll make up a diagnosis, honey. Speaking of diagnosis, is there a doctor in the house? I love asking that question. I don't know why it's so camp to me.
Yes, that last one too.
And we do have a doctor in the house, and I would love to introduce them. Our guest for today is Dr. Nicole Truesdell. Dr. Truesdell is an abolitionist, anthropologist, astrologer, and founder of Abolitionist Dreamscapes. And by the way, Dr. Truesdell is a three-time returner here at Town Hall of Black Queer Podcast with a PhD in
Mhm.
anthropology from Michigan State University. She specializes in race, citizenship, and nation state. And the nation state. You heard that again? With a PhD in anthropology from Michigan State University. She specializes in race, citizenship, and the nation state. She uses her expertise to challenge oppressive systems and reimagine new ways of living. Dr. Truesdell brings academia and spirituality and inspires us to dream boldly and envision a world free from oppression. Let's hear from Dr. Truesdell.
Hi, I'm Dr. Nicole Truesdell. I'm an anthropologist by training, and right now I work for myself. I am a consultant and also a dreamer. I'm somebody that really thinks about what does it mean to break the things that don't work for us, and for me, what didn't work was my whole life. so, so I decided that if it didn't work, then logically doesn't it make sense to try something different, and so when we break the things that don't work, we have to then dream of what does. And so, what I do is, I'm an anthropologist who believes in coming back to being human. And I think the only way we can be human again is by being creative. And so, we have to dream. That's why I call myself a dreamer. So, what wasn't working in my life was who I thought I was, right? There's a way that I talk about this in my work about identity and how we understand who we are based upon how our body is read by society, right? So my body, I'm a 6'3" woman, black woman, mixed race black woman, and when I say it that way, only because people love to move the conversation. But I'm a 6'3" black woman who my whole life has been told that my body is made to be of service to others. My body can hold the ability to not only produce for me, but produce for everybody around me. And in my return, I should be grateful for people wanting to use my labor, right? So that's why I went into higher ed. I was in higher ed as an educator, thinking I could break things that didn't work, and in reality, I ended up just giving more of myself and getting burnt out. And so, because of that, I realized what would it look like if we didn't have to be in institutions that are killing us, but instead believe that they're trying to kill us, and figure out what we do to pivot. So that wasn't working. And then when I pivoted there, I realized I also wasn't straight. So, so coming out also later in life for me was another way that I realized that I was breaking the relationship I had to who I was supposed to be, which is again in this very heteronormative white patriarchal society. It meant that I was just supposed to be somebody there, giving up who I was to everybody else. But then I had to ask myself, what was I getting in return? And my body said, you ain't getting shit. So why are you doing it? So that's what really happened. My body turned on, and when my body turned on, that's when I realized that my humanity was suffering because I wasn't allowing myself to be fully human. So we think about identity, right? We have to remember that we understand who we are in relation to other people based upon those identities. So we talk about race, so blackness, right? Black folks, black people. And when you think about what it means to be black and a collective blackness, there's a way that I would argue right now that is breaking and it needs to break. And this is what I mean by that. Ideas of blackness and what it means to be black coming out of the white imagination, right? The only reason why we have black is in relationship to white. It's the dialectic, if you want to get fancy with it, right? I am what I am not. But in that, we have to ask ourselves then, what does it mean to actually be black in a world that only understands blackness as a commodity for its gain? Right? And so I think collectively, what we're realizing now is that we have to take back that comprehension of Blackness and allow ourselves to be diverse in our understandings of what it means to be Black. So I think the Black collective right now is understanding that not only are we very different in who we are, but that difference is what actually makes us a collective stronger, if that makes sense. Because we're fighting back against, we have to fight back and push back against this idea of who we are in relationship to our oppressor, which is going to be whiteness as an ideology. And since whiteness needs everything the same, it doesn't like difference, right? It doesn't like any kind of diversity, even though y'all, to be human means you have to be diverse because you can't survive. Like, this is why the monarchies are dying because they keep inbreeding. Like, it's a real thing. We need diversity to live. When we understand that, so we push back against this kind of idea of who we are by embracing our differences, I think right now we're realizing just how different we are as a collective, and that's what's going to allow us to figure out new ways forward. So when we think about the idea of blackness, right, there is a weight to it. There is an historical weight to it. We wouldn't be understanding ourselves as black if there was not an historical event that happened. And that was chattel slavery, right? That was what we call the triangular trade, but it was more than a triangle, y'all. It was all over the world. When we understand that we only came together through the concept of blackness because they took different populations from different locations in what we now call West Africa that had different languages, different practices, different rivalries themselves, different coalitions themselves, right? Different relationships, and you bring them together into a different location. This is what we call the imagined communities. You imagine the community based upon the location you're in, the kind of shared language you may have, the kind of shared iconography you have. And so when we talk about blackness and black folks, especially in the US, it then aligns itself with the history of chattel slavery because the construction of black people then comes as a way that the state marked us to mark us as the commodity for the nation, right? So there is a lot of weight with that, but we are more than just a commodity. So there is a way that when you put upon our body this idea of black that over time has taken shape and form like it has, right? Then what does it mean for us to reclaim that identity outside the white gaze when the white gaze didn't really even understand it? They just put a bunch of folks together in a place to make them do work for them. And in doing so, we created a whole different way and culture that not only can they not break, but they're trying to commodify once again because it literally built the goddamn nation state to begin with, right? So when we think about the weight of blackness and the black collective in relationship to chattel slavery, this is why I get really irritated when folks are talking about everything ain't about race. Baby, talk to your goddamn forefathers about why everything is about race. Because the only reason why we have black people talking about blackness in the US is because your raggedy ass ancestors decided to take them, bring them over here, and create a whole concept that we now call race. And that is how we mark the body. So we can't separate the two, but we're not beholden just to that history, though. And I think that's where we have to realize that we cannot use the colonial sight, the colonial gaze, and the colonial historical analysis to understand that history. So race impacts everything that we do today, whether you like it or not. Right? You ain't got to like it, but you got to understand it because we live in racial capitalism. And I know when I was on last time, I talked about capitalism, and I recommend folks listen to that to get further context. But we live in a society that understands economics through the body, and the body is marked via race. And who does it the best? The US, but everybody else does it too. And this is what we got to be careful of, y'all, right now, especially with these elections results in the US that are coming out that are still trying to make sense of and we're still getting more of. But at the same time, this idea that only in the US or in South Africa that race is the main marker of difference. We just saw race riots in the UK all goddamn summer. We're seeing the rise of fascism in Western Europe right now because they do not want those that they conquested to come in and take their shit, right? And we're also seeing the rise of national identity within Latin America. Some of y'all don't want to hear this, but within Latin America, that is mimicking and mimics heavily what we see in the West. And we're going to still see the same reproduction of anti-blackness, of anti-indigeneity, of anti-queerness if we're not careful, right, about how we understand who we are in relationship to where we come from. When we talk about the idea of race being foundational of the state, right, we have to understand the nation state, the Western nation state is built upon human difference via race. But we have different ways that we have understood race based upon who your colonizer was. So because we are a British colonial project, we have a very distinct, rigid racial classification scheme because it's British, y'all. The Brits are rigid and they like they shit real bone dry, okay? When you get to the Spanish and the Portuguese colonial projects, you have a lot more of admixture that's added in because the way they try to colonize is through mixing of blood versus separating blood. But at the end of the day, it's all the same basis of differentiation based upon racial classifications. I don't care if you have 4 or if you have 14. It is still understanding difference via that. So when you think about then how you identify your identity and you put your nationhood first, which let's be real, it's not just America that does it. It is strong within Latin American countries, right? The nation state comes first. I understand why, but you have to be careful of that because what you end up doing is reproducing what the state needs you to do, which is its status quo. And if its status quo doesn't like to be Black, doesn't want to be Indigenous, doesn't want to be queer, doesn't want to be anything that it conceives deviant, you are no better than the other colonizer. You just have a different font to it. And I think that's why we have to understand the foundation of these nation states is based upon racial classification differences that dictated then how the state gave you and saw your rights or not rights. Which means, is your body for its state for it to be a low labor so they can take your energy by taking your labor and not paying you back? Or does it see that your body is one that can be the representation of the nation? So then you get all the resources and you're put in front of the screen. And I think if we look at Latin America, and especially, there's been a long debate with this in TV and media and how and what is seen, right? The lighter, the brighter, the wider you are, the more you are given access to representation of the nation. The darker, the queerer, the more indigenous you are, right? The more you are laid to rest as somehow historically in the past. Right. So we think about it either way it goes. Race is foundation to the nation state. That's why we have to break national identity as the way we understand who we are in relation to one another. So when we think about the kind of origin stories of nation states, when we look at a lot of Latin American countries, there is this kind of origin story of the mestizaje, that somehow people are born of a mixture of Spanish or whatever the Western European was, indigenous and Black. Now that sounds really cute, but that was actually a PR campaign for many nation states. That was a way that the state was constructing itself in order to subsume the indigenous and make themselves the new settler. It's still another form of settler colonialism. The US did the same thing. A lot of British colonial projects, a lot of English-speaking nation states have done the exact same thing. We see it in Australia. We try to see it in New Zealand, but the Maori are telling them folks they can get the fuck, they can back up. But we also see it in the US, right? So you have to understand that the idea that mixing is somehow special aligns with this idea that you can fuck out of the bloodline those who are already there. It's another form of eugenics making, y'all, but through ideology and historical context. This is why history is so important. This is why you will see in every nation state, Western nation state, that they take over the historical record. Because if you can take over somebody's history, you've taken over their people, you've taken over their culture, you've taken over their land. Therefore, you can put into their mind who they are and where they come from that benefits the maintenance of what already is. So if they give you a history that has this kind of very whitewashed, what I call mixed wash, because my initial studies were looking at mixture in the nation state and how that was a kind of targeted means of some colonial projects to ensure that they brought in a new quote unquote race of people, right? When we understand that none of that makes actually any sense and we are just tools and pawns of these states, then we can actually start to break our relationship to them by breaking our attachments to the identity that says that that is who we really are. And that to me is what we have to dream beyond what the projects told us. Because are you an American or are you a Mexican or are you a body that happened to be born into a location that then has a set of cultural traits to it, cultural ties, cultural histories that you then have to ground it and ask yourself what you are then creating and moving forward with? Right. And that's where the embodiment process comes in. So we got to stop just saying, oh, Viva, whatever it is, or, go USA when quite frankly, does the state actually give a shit about you if you look at your basic needs being met? So there is a way that we've also been told that the state tried to make amends for what it did. And we have this idea of Reconstruction in the US is one example of it. But let's be real. And W.B. Du Bois still has, I think, the most comprehensive analysis of Reconstruction that he wrote at the end of the 18 or beginning of the 1900s, is that it didn't work. It was a farce. It was another land grab. Remember something, y'all. US is an MLM. It's a multi-level marketing scheme. Okay. At the end of the day, I did a video 2 years ago called Thoughts While High, where I was high as hell talking about how the US ain't nothing but an MLM. After watching a whole bunch of documentaries, y'all gotta watch that Lula Rich, because that shit threw me. I was like, woo, child. I was organizing BLM and they were selling leggings. We live in two different realities. What we have to remember is if we understand, because capitalism ain't nothing but an MLM, y'all. Let's be real. There was no long-term goal or vision for capitalism. It just said, I like your shit. I'm going to take your shit and I'm going to keep taking it until there is no more. Then I'm going to figure out a way to take somebody else's in replacement, right? There's no sustainability to this. So when you think about it that way, and then you then you understand what we're supposed to be doing. This is nothing but an MLM. Like we have to constantly be trying to create new things while also not fixing what already is. So when you look at the US coming up, right, and you look at even some of the historical record of George Washington and his men and talking about the Revolutionary War, and when they were fighting the various indigenous populations, if you read the journals, that man said, basically, this is some good ass land, get them natives off because I can speculate. He was a speculator. He made his money off of land speculation. The whole movement west, right, in the US, the whole kind of art movement and impressionist movement and the whole landscape movement in the early 1900s was nothing more than a propaganda machine to get folks to believe that the West was some vacant open land of just milk and honey for them to go in. They needed to go in and regulate it with the US Park Services. No. First, there were natives there. They're still there. And second, the US needed to make money somehow because we were coming out of a goddamn depression. So you have to create. And how do you make jobs and create jobs and make land? You take land. It's an MLM. There's no long-term solution, but it is all about land grabbing in one way, shape, or form. Right. So if we understand that, I think it'll help us realize that all of this is as an illusion and lie. Like we're living in a story. We're living in somebody else's story. We're living in somebody else's fantasy that they may come true. George Washington looked and saw, I can take this and put some shit on it and make some money. That was a vision he had. That was a vision. He had a dream. It could have been God. It could have been as raggedy as ant. It could have been anybody, right? But he had a vision and dream. And what did he do? He enacted it. Right? So that's what we have to understand. This is nothing more than a fantasy. This is nothing more than a story that we have all been made to be a part of. So then what does it mean to break the story? So for me, what it means to break the story is you got to start to dream again. But how do you dream? I remember 10 years ago, I started doing this in higher ed and I was at a conference. We got invited, no, maybe it was 8 years ago. We got invited, me and my team to give a workshop at, I believe it was National Women's Studies Association or one of the big organizations that wanted us to train their chairs and their directors to kind of do decolonial work in the academy. That's what I was initially doing, decolonizing pedagogies. And I opened up the session with, when's the last time you dreamed? And when I say the laughs in that room, it was like a visceral reaction. These are academics who are all decolonizers and abolitionists and radicals. And I asked the question, okay, what does it mean to dream? People laughed and they said, I don't have time for that. Then I said, shit, if we ain't got time to dream, what the hell, what we gonna do when we break the things that are breaking us, right? And so for me, telling the different story means you have to believe what your reality is in right now. You have to believe what is going on right now. You have to come into your reality. And the only way you're going to come into your reality is coming into your body. You got to turn your body on. You have to take back what was taken from us. Again, capitalism not only is an MLM, it's also a thief because multi-level marketing schemes are nothing more than liars and con men and thieves. I mean, there's some good ones too. I saw some shit. I'm like, damn, I can learn some things, right? From some of these folks because it's about the story you can tell to convince people to buy into your vision, right? So you do that when you're disconnected and you're looking for somebody else to give your authority up to. This is why religion was used first as part of the colonial project. They had to remove us from the land and our ancestors by putting their God on top of it, giving your authority up to somebody else that says, well, you're supposed to give your authority up to the embodiment on earth, which is the slave master, right? It's another form of feudalism. So we understand that. And then we come back to how we tell a new story. Well, you got to take that back. It's a thief. It's not going to give it to you, right? You got to get dirty with the shit. So you got to come back into the body. When you come back into the body, right, this is where pleasure is important. You can't just meet fire with fire. And I know I'm ruled by fire. I know that shit very well. You have to figure out how to have the fire clarify. It needs to clear and burn some shit away, right? So when you do that, when you come into the body, that means you got to bring some water into it. You got to feel. When you start to feel, you start to realize that maybe what you've been doing and who you've been with and what you are has you fucked up. You got yourself fucked up, right? That is when grief hits the body. That is when you realize that something has to be let go, something has to release, something has to die. So when you believe your reality, tell a different story, you got to cut that motherfucker off. You have to literally kill that story, and it's got to start with killing it in you. And that's where the grief comes. We don't know how to work with our emotions because God forbid we feel something. What are you called? Emotional, doing too much, right? Well, in my back in my day, and I love my black elders, but we got to stop that shit because back in your day, what you did in the present day, you miserable. I don't think I want to do that. Like I am seeing the impact it has on your body, and I want to give you a hug. But since you don't want to have a hug, I need to cuss you out and say I can't do it that way because you are not only showing me that it does not work, you are also screaming out in pain, but you can't feel that because God forbid you feel your pain. You might realize the last 70 years of your life, you have to fucking do it that way. I get it. Be angry. Be angry that you realize later in life you didn't have to do it that way. I was so angry when I realized that I was gay, and I was angry when I realized I knew it when I was a kid and stuffed that shit down because I knew it wasn't safe and didn't even realize I stuffed it down. I think all the time, what would have happened if I was okay loving a woman in my 20s just because I didn't knew it, right? The freedom I felt the last 2 years just being able to express and be just with Black queer folks. I didn't realize how much being in straight spaces made me so uncomfortable, right? The tightness, the performance, even if it was all Black, I don't care if it's Black and straight, that shit does not work for me either, right? But I had to believe my reality because if I didn't, then I was telling myself I'm uncomfortable. And Nicole, it's you, contorting, right? I was in all Black academic spaces, hated it because I felt nothing but the spirit of whiteness in that motherfucker cosplaying Blackness with the goddamn Frankie Beverly song in the background singing, we gonna be okay. Like, no, we're not because we cosplaying whiteness in a Black space and this is radical and it's not. But until I believe that, I was sitting here being anxious in my body, stuffing it down, wondering why I was sick, wondering why I was having all of a sudden asthma. My breath was taken, right? My body was so sick. The doctor told me at 38, if I didn't calm my stress down, I would be dead at 45. And she was dead serious when she said that, right? So telling a different story means taking back what was stolen to break that shit in you, which means you got to believe your body. So that's the first step. For practically how I started to come into my body and believe it is quite frankly, I had my heart broken because I got protested for 7 months at Brown. I had to, for me, again, I'm 3 fixed signs, y'all. I'm a Scorpio rising, Taurus, Moon, Leo, Sun. Like that's cute and all. I think I'd be flowing, but a bitch be fixed. I'd be like, I'm good. Oh shit. I guess I wasn't, right? so so for me, and I don't recommend this, so please learn from me. For me, I had to have my heart broken. I had to get played in my face, even though I was getting played in my face, but have the playing in my face be so traumatic and so visceral, and have people that looked like me treat me like white folks did for me to understand, oh, wait a minute, this shit ain't for me. So I had to first break. And I don't recommend it, but it does happen. I had to have my heart broken, and then I believed it. Then I believed. What happened to me was the biggest fear I ever had. And when that fear happened and I was able to survive, I realized, oh shit, okay, well, I've just conquered my biggest fear: rejection, betrayal, and shunning. Well, bitch is still here, right? And actually, all of that broke everything. So I got to me. So after that, then I had to honestly, I was in therapy and that did help. At first it was talk therapy. I'm currently now in a much more holistic therapy. I really like her a lot. It's a combination of somatic work, brain spotting, and talking because there was a way. I just talked about this in my Patreon this morning. There is a way that a lot of us can logic things away. I can logic anything away. I was trained in it, right? Like I know what this brain can do, but I'm a big bitch. I'm 6'3". My body's got to process this shit, right? So from going from here to go all the way down to my feet, it's going to have to flow and feel, right? So there's also a way that when my heart got broken, there was no ability for me to not sit in it because my job was taken away. Like I left, I chose to leave after my contract ended to go on and do my own thing. So I had to give myself the second thing about breaking the stories. I had to give myself back time, right? I had to take back the second thing that was stolen, which was time. And in doing that, it was a lot of me just sitting with myself and feeling and realizing that even if I kept feeling, it would eventually move, but I had to allow myself to cry. Like it was literally a process of releasing. All that fire had to go somewhere and it went through water. So it was crying, but it was also, quite frankly, sex too. Like there's a way that when we're talking about this, it was learning how to get in my body and what brought me pleasure. And then being with a woman, being with women, right? Understanding how my body moved and work outside of the rigidness that I didn't realize I was doing, being not only in higher ed, but being in a marriage with a man, right? A cis straight man. Like, I don't know how y'all do that. I don't know how I did for 15 years, right? Like, I really don't. Like, God damn. Like, it's a long told you, committed. That's a long time, I'm committed. 15 because of Taurus moon, right? Leave when you know it ain't working. Stop trying to commit to some shit, y'all. Learn from me. A bitch is loyal to the wrong people. So that's what I had to learn too, right? How to work with my energy. Because this is another thing I had to realize. I've got a lot of energy. I'm not only am I big, but I got a lot of Uranus sits on my Scorpio in my first house, right? Like I don't know how not to break shit. So when I realized that that's also the energy I carried, then I had to understand that I had to hold that energy because I was so used to giving it away. That Leo, if you're a Leo, it's so common. The sun, right? You're used to providing the light. That's why people say, oh, Leos need, compliments. Yes, the fuck we do. Because I'm giving you my light. I need something back, right? Same with the Cancer moon, the luminaries, like we illuminate. So there needs to be illumination back. So when I realized but I had to give it back to myself first, right? When you talk about calling your energy back, that was really important too, because I could be mad all day long and I can burn that shit away, but then I'm still giving it out so that if that light was needed, even if people, and that's the thing that killed me too, people had all kinds of things they wanted to say about me. They could accuse me all kinds of things, but they still couldn't keep my name out their mouth and they still couldn't stop following me and figuring out what I was doing, right? So when I believed that too, instead of believing the perception of who I thought I was supposed to be that didn't work out because I didn't do it X, Y, and Z way, I realized that what was attractive but also repulsive was my light. So that's another part of believing your reality. You have to believe who you are, right? You got to believe who you are. And it's hard when you are told your whole life to be humble, when you are told that, that is crass, when you are told that it's arrogant. Like I grew up Catholic, so that Catholic guilt is real, right? My whole goddamn life, and again with pleasure too, like it's only in service to the husband or, in the marriage or to some sacred thing. But if you don't see yourself as the sacred thing first, right? That's how you end up giving it away. So I had to take my time back. And that's how I was able to process things by realizing that if I believed my reality that space was not for me, that those people weren't for me, those the way I was moving wasn't for me, then I had to give myself permission to figure out who the hell I was. And that's where the time came in. And this is where, again, I really do appreciate Trisha Hershey's work a lot and Sonia Renee Taylor's work about taking rest and coming into the body. Because again, especially as Black women, Black queer folks, I'm talking to us specifically, we have to understand that in these capital systems, I talk about this in the capitalism episode a while ago, is that we are both a source of reproduction and labor. Right? Our bodies are seen as reproduction because we birth the next generation and labor, right? And even if you're not birthing a child, you're birthing ideas. Don't you ever forget that's also creating. So if we know that that is how we are seen, and that is the way, even when people don't want to see us that way, that is the only way that society has shown Black bodies to be, especially queer and women bodies, femme bodies, right? Then we have to take that back and re-examine what and who we are outside of just giving up our light. So you have to kind of be arrogant. You really do, because what we call arrogant is just us having self-reflection and self-confidence, right? This is why I like Duran so much. So Duran, I love Duran Bernard so much because of what he says about humility and stuff. Why would I humble myself to something else when I'm supposed to actually stand in the essence of who I am and shine so that other people can shine as well? It's not a competition. We need to all shine together to have a light and vision that we can all enact together in the future. So going back to what I said earlier, I'm long-winded, y'all, but how do we break the story, right? This is how you do it because you got to know who the hell you are and what skills and gifts you actually bring to to creation itself. So, how do you build a new narrative when you break the stuff, right? So, this is where you have to allow yourself to play. This is the playing in the dreamscape. So, this is a lot of the work that I do. And I would argue right now that a lot of folks need facilitation with this. Like, so whether it be the facilitation of you working with like you group of people and y'all are just coming together and just taking time to actually talk about what you want, talk about your dream, but also talk about your fears, right? That's one way to do it. But for me, I do believe that we need facilitation with this because we have been facilitated out of our dreams. We have been systematically taught how not to imagine and to limit our possibilities. So for me, I do this a lot with music. So I believe in working with music and working with song and working with dance, working with the actual body, the conjuring, what we have always done in the past to literally bring spirit down. But what we're bringing down now is our own spirit, right? We're trying to bring our own spirit back into our body. So we got to call it back. And so how we dream is by calling in spirit, but the spirit of ourselves. So when I do dream, so I host dream incubations in which I start with the contemplation that is aligned with the theme of whatever we're talking about. And then I'm learning how to DJ. It's real slow, but I'm doing it first through playlist creations. And so taking somebody on a journey through music. So I do a lot, how I create playlists is through whatever the theme is. I do listen both to the tempo, but also to the lyrics. And I want to tell a story through the playlist itself that then brings people through a journey. So it's really about carving out time. So what I'll do it is I'll say we have a beginning on contemplation, then I'll do an hour-long set that we're all together, whether it be online or in person, or we're just playing. Whatever comes to you is there. And then at the end of it, we bring it down and then we come in and we talk about what we created, what came up. And in that, that allows this a facilitation of a space that is holding us to be able to be vulnerable. That is vulnerability, right? Vulnerability is the ability for you to be able to express what your needs are and what your desires are, right? But you have to be vulnerable with yourself first. I argue that this is why folks have really pushed back against Meg Thee Stallion in the public. Like I watched a documentary, right? And yes, it's misogynoir, of course, like it's all of that. But if you can even go a little bit deeper into the misogynoir, I just talked to Moya Bailey on my podcast about this a couple weeks ago, is that you have to understand Megan is naturally very vulnerable. She's a very vulnerable person in terms of she expresses her feelings. Like she'll say, her music, even if she even said, even if I'm pussy popping on a handstand, I'm still gonna talk about I'm a pussy depressed, right? Like there's a way that she embeds, right? That's a brilliant line, right? But it's brilliant because the vulnerability. This whole last album, but even the album before, is expressing depression, is expressing anxiety, is expressing the fact that yeah, it's not about being perfect. It is about me understanding that I lost a lot of folks and I'm trying to figure it out my own. That's vulnerable. But it's vulnerable in a body that we are told is only to be a couple of things of service, a sex object, is something to just be, to commodify from, right? So the fact that Meg is expressing a vulnerability, she's expressing the essence of humanity. And when you see humanity through a body that we have been told we are supposed to dehumanize in one way, shape, or form, you react. Because how? Because then if she can express that and get into that, you have a feeling. And God forbid you have a feeling. If you got a feeling, maybe you got to figure out what the hell is going on too, but you don't want to do that, so you project upon it. So a lot of misogynoir is there, but it was misogynoir because of the way that she expresses humanity through real vulnerability. But that's how you dream. That's how you break the fucking story, y'all. This is why I can't work. This is why I can't work in social justice spaces as much anymore if the space is not actually honest. Because I've been in too many spaces in which people are talking, you have all these beautiful ideals and lists of things you're doing, and you're checking it off, and you're talking about it being transformed or restorative, but no one in the space has the courage to actually say what they need and want, because everybody is trying to perform the aesthetic of what it means to do right, to be right, to do the right thing. Breaking the story means breaking being right. Do you want to be right or do you want to be free? Stop being right. Stop being right and actually be honest, right? Because if you're being honest, that will allow you to figure out what your needs are, what your desires are, and who you can actually create with. And so for me, how we dream together is that is what a lot of it will do off the bat too. And I know I'm stranger to this, and I tell people all the time, you bring me in to do a dream incubation or facilitation with you, and we bring honesty in, something is going to break first before you can actually build and dream. And it has to. Because many times you look around and say, do you actually want to build with these people? Can you be honest about that? Right? And if you are, then there's a way that that's what's going to allow us to break the colonial project. Because we're bringing our humanity back in, and it's going to be messy. It's not going to be clear. It's going to be a lot of trial and error. But let's be real, we're living in trial and error right now. They're playing trial and error with their goddamn lives. Right? They're literally playing trial and error with our lives right now. So you might as well do it for yourself. Is how I see it. So I know that there's been a lot of conversation about the kind of relationship between the Black community and Latin community, especially in the US, right? And I think we have to pull that apart a bit, because the idea of who is Latin is a amalgamation of a hell of a lot of different locations, right? And so when we really pull apart that data that we're seeing more now coming out, we are seeing the typical actors of who have aligned themselves with whiteness, which is the Cubans, right? We saw, I think the Puerto Rican and Mexican was Puerto Rican then Mexican, right? Think about those populations and the national identities attached to them and their migration patterns. Right? So we have to understand something. When you come into the US, you are racialized. I don't care where you come from. When you come into the US, you are socialized through a racialization, and you are then put into a category. And I think some people have bought into the category the state put them into, not realizing that they are being a tool and a fool of the state, because they will open up that passage to whiteness when it suits them. But the minute they get your vote, they will close that bitch up, and you will become the first ones who are at the chopping block of what comes next. And so I think we have to realize that it is the next example of the impact and the power of whiteness to get people to buy into its story of who you are. Right? And that's why we will see some of the darkest skinned folks who are, say, Dominican talking about, I know Black. Of course you're not, because for you to align with that would mean that you are denying the identity you were told your whole life, which is Dominican. And to buy into the being Dominican means you are buying into an idea of mestizaje that is antithesis to freedom making, because if you actually bought into, say, being fully Black, you might do what Haiti did and push back against those motherfuckers. Right? I think that and that's a real conversation that we have to start having in the public, and also behind closed doors, because this is exactly what we saw happening in the early 1900s with the opening up of whiteness for Irish and Italians, right? We have seen history is on a loop. We are always in a loop until we break it, hence the story and breaking the story. You got to break the story by breaking these loops. And if we're seeing the patterns, again, this is why they take our history. They take your history and they take your health so that you're sick and ignorant, so that you don't understand the patterns for it. This is a colonial tactic, a strategy, the Southern strategy to be exact, right? So now we're seeing how much people have bought into what the state told them they were. You're the good one. You're the model minority. We saw what happened with affirmative action and Asian Americans who used that idea, who were the first ones who didn't get put in, who didn't get accepted majority-wise next go around. Asian Americans. Right? So when you think you're aligning with your oppressor and you give what they want up to it, the next go around, you will be the first one gone, because you're disposable now. You have your use is done. And that's what you have to understand. We are all commodities. Who understands that the best is Black folks. Who do people not believe the most? Black folks. So now we understand how the system maintains, because those who are impacted first and the most are the ones who are also told are not to be believed. And we see this in mythology with the mythology of Cassandra. She was given the gift of prophecy and sight, but she was also told, given I think it was Apollo that said, no one will believe you though. So she was the one that told everyone Troy was going to burn. No one believed her, and it happened. So it's the mythology of the ways that the woman's voice and vision is always suppressed under patriarchal societies. We're seeing the same thing here, right? So we have to understand, when the people who you are told not to believe, why? And if they are always the ones who are actually right, but you still don't believe them, that is another place that you can find your attachments to these structures are and start to break that, because it will eventually come for you. I define freedom as living authentically as me. And so for that to happen, I had to figure out who the me was. So freedom to me is taking back what was stolen, like I said earlier, which is our life, our breath, and our bodies. And so for me to be free means for me to really live freely and take up space in the 6-3 body, which means that a lot of people, a lot of things, a lot of spaces may be uncomfortable, but I'm realizing that freedom is about working through the uncomfortability to find my own light. I think that's for all of us too. So again, this is why I say we have to dream. And I always say, if you want to dream with me, right, there's ways that I do it, but if not dream with me, you got to dream with other people, which means you got to come back to yourself. So freedom to me is also giving yourself permission to take back your rest, lay the fuck down, and actually ask yourself, what do you want? I'm really committed to helping people break the things that don't work for them and dream of things that do. This is what I call my creative work abolitionist dreamscapes. And so if you are in the Chicagoland area, December 8th, I'm holding an in-person incubator at the Honeycomb in Humboldt Park, in which I call this a combination of bringing the ring, shout, and juke joint together in a space so that we can call down the energy of creativity and play for us to strategically dream of something different. So that's one place. But I also host dream incubators on my Patreon, Abolitionist Dreamscapes. And for folks who are interested in doing this in their organizations or individually, my strategy firm, Truesdell and Associates, I work with various organizations and individuals who are looking to strategically dream differently of what it means to create new possibilities. So organizationally, institutionally, and within communities. So if you're interested in any of those services, you can look at my website, drnicoletruesdell.com, has all of that and more.
It's just wild to me, thinking back to earlier in the first episode talking about the the what is it, the miseducation of, let me read it, the miseducation of Castlemont High, with the students that were challenging Steven Spielberg in response to their reactions
Oh yeah, that's
about
the
Schindler's
episode of
List.
that's the episode we never told y'all last time. The episode on This American Life is episode 644. Okay,
644.
it's episode 644, The Miseducation of Castlemont High. I'm telling y'all,
Mhm.
this is one of
And so
the best podcasts I've ever listened to. I cannot recommend it enough.
I'm gonna listen to it. But one of the things I think it's really interesting, the listen, I mean, we have to, anti-Semitism is one of the longest running and oldest forms of discrimination and hierarchical subjugation and that have existed, is because it has religious ties, that go back thousands and thousands of years. One of the things that I find interesting is the the in that situation, and I didn't listen to the episode, you know, the reverence for the sort of, or the need to use those students as an example of what they're saying is anti-Semitic. And I don't, I didn't listen to it. I don't really know. These students were laughing. I guess people were saying that they were insulted because the students were laughing as if they were laughing at what was happening, making light of it. And, I can understand why people would have that sort of reaction, because that's certainly not something to be laughing at. But, the effort that's put into holding up these Black students as the new face of anti-Semitism, it does fall short when we don't also acknowledge things like, like after the war, after World War II, we went to war and fought against Germany and Hitler and won. I thought that was just only because we had the cause of anti-Semitism and dehumanization is wrong, and we're going to go to war for it. But it really does seem as though it was a race for power, like who was going to be able to control certain parts of the globe. And then when you think of Operation Paperclip, where we invited a lot of those same engineers and scientists who were Nazis from Germany and from over in Europe over to America to work in American STEM, it seems wild to me. People who were lower level or maybe even some upper level people who were not in, imprisoned or murdered after the Nuremberg trials. Many of them were able to build a new life, change their name, and build a new life here in the United States.
Yeah.
And that doesn't seem right.
Yeah, it's not right. And some of those people have been found and caught and sent to jail even decades and decades and decades later.
Afterwards, yeah.
Yeah, decades later. But
I
yeah,
mean, as old elderly
yeah,
people that
yeah,
like now they're
yeah,
basically
yeah.
dying in jail.
But yeah, when you learn about World War II in school, you hear like, well, Hitler just really hated Jewish people. But what no one's saying is
That's
like,
all we hear.
what they're not saying is Hitler just used hate for Jewish people to justify why he can take things away from them and invade places. He was like,
And get power.
exactly.
Mhm.
He was like, I really want that land. How can I convince people? Well, I think people already kind of don't
It's
like Jewish
blame it
people.
on Jewish
They
people.
already kind of don't like Jewish people anyway. So I'll just really use that because I really want what they have, and I have to make people really, really, really hate them, and therefore they
In
won't care.
order, yeah. And we manufacture consent. And that's exactly what he did. He manufactured a consent to hate this group of people and do all these horrible things to them so that we can get
Yeah.
the land,
And some
take
of
the
you are
money,
probably
control.
listening, thinking to yourself, I could never fall for that, but we did. I remember being in high school. I was very young. I was in 10th grade. But when 9/11 happened, there was a very real dislike for
For Muslim people.
any Arabic people. And I mean,
Even if they looked, but even if they were Indian,
yeah.
that also impacted Indian folks, too, East Indian folks.
Yeah, yeah, and again, not that I mean, I'm not gonna say it didn't affect like Nation of Islam Muslims, like Black American Muslims, but it really heavily impacted brown Muslims from the Middle East specifically. And it
Because
got
of
to the
the way we look and prejudging people by
yes,
their
and it got
look.
to the point where when you would see something happening in the Middle East, you would feel you'd be like, good, it's happening. Like they have galvanized us in a way that
Mhm.
when this happens, we're all like, yay, we did it. We conquered those bad people. So it doesn't matter that over half a million civilians were killed during the war on terror. But long as we got like those 1,000 people who the government is saying we know for sure they were Al Qaeda, and I know we killed over half a million, but we got like 1,000 of them. So like, guys, come on, it's a numbers game. Like we
And I think people were able to see that, and maybe it had a lot to do with the changing technology and the way that around that time, around the early aughts, the news and media was very corporate and worked along with telling the stories that the government wanted them to tell, but also did not. It became something that was in the palm of our hands, not as much as it is today, but certainly it started to become a lot more independent. And, people were able to see a lot quicker the what was wrong with these wars, the Iraq War and the
yeah.
Afghanistan War and this war on terror. And people were speaking out about it. I think we might have mentioned on a previous show, I'm not quite sure, but Phil Donahue, who was legendary for a talk show host who had a very long career, predated Oprah, probably, was a mentor to her in some way, shape, or form. And had a really, really successful daytime talk career for throughout the 80s and the 90s. And he had a show back on MSNBC when MSNBC was new in the wake of 9/11. And his was the highest rated show on MSNBC. And he was starting to express doubts in the war and what we were doing in the Middle East and what was all the things that were happening and what we were saying we were doing versus what we were really doing.
Mm-hmm.
And he got yanked from that air so quickly.
Yeah.
You
Because I
know.
mean, they really they put it they were on the war on terror in the early 2000s. They were able to put a face to it. So right, two faces
Mm-hmm.
really. So if you could really just if you could just quickly and easily equate a Middle Eastern brown person to either Saddam Hussein or Osama bin Laden, if you could just draw a quick little line and be like, who's more like Osama bin Laden, me or that person? And if that person is anything like them, from even from an area or region, has any same religion, same skin color,
It's really skin.
same beard, same anything like that person, they're bad because they created we had the face of the villain, and then everyone who was remotely associated with this villain, but mostly just by skin color,
Mm-hmm.
because everyone
And
from
it's
North.
an incorrect. I mean, it's brown folks, but that were from completely different
Oh yeah,
religious groups, completely
different
different
continents.
hemispheres, different continent, not having nothing to do with it. But they just kind of look like they could have been. And that's not even like, oh yeah, they actually do look the same. It's our own American ignorance and not knowing much about other cultures and worlds
Yeah,
outside of America, that we would mistake these people. So that's when you see something, say something, which we had here in New York and then spread all over the country, became a thing. And that was basically giving folks the permission to I don't think they were doing a lot less calling the cops when they would like confront people and accuse them of being terrorists. They're just sitting there riding the train going to work,
there was a
you know.
famous incident with Jess Hilarious, the one of the co-hosts of the morning show, no, the Breakfast Club, and she was on a
Mm-hmm.
plane
Her
and she
ass.
saw a gentleman who was of the Sikh religion.
Mm-hmm.
And to be clear,
From India,
Sikhs are not
usually.
Sikhs
Yeah.
are not Muslim, but they do wear turbans. And she filmed this Sikh gentleman getting on the plane, and she was like, "I don't feel comfortable with him on the plane. Basically, why is he wearing a turban? I don't feel comfortable." By the way, y'all, this was not in 2002. This is not 2003. This is not 2004. This wasn't in 2010. This was well after all of this. And she was like, "I don't want to ride." She basically said, "I don't want to ride a plane with a Muslim." The guy wasn't even Muslim. And then and then got the whole plane deboarded, by the way, the whole plane, because she has a huge platform. The whole plane was then deboarded. This person was removed from the plane because she insinuated that this man was a terrorist. She just kind of like insinuated that he was a terrorist. And she was like, I don't care because I don't feel comfortable. So I don't care that he's gone. I feel safe now. And that was what a lot of us were doing in the early 2000s. And by the way, I always tell people,
Yeah.
it's not your fault because especially if you're a millennial, you were literally a child. You were literally a child listening to
It's
adults
not
watching
our
the
fault.
news.
It's not our fault. This is not just that was not just hilarious, just deciding to be a bigot. She was basically regurgitating a lot of the sentiments and things that we've been taught. And this isn't even just in the wake of 9/11. It became very it became overt and and more obvious. But I always tell this story, like, not to get too deep into anything, but I used to watch, my favorite wrestling show was called Glow, Gorgeous Ladies of Wrestling, women's wrestling show that came on in the 80s. And they had all these, like most wrestling shows, they had all these archetypes. And so like people were like, they had the farmer's daughter, and they had these two black girls named Hollywood and Vine, and they were basically prostitutes.
Hollywood and Vine, those names. That's so great. I'm sorry. That is so.
Yeah. They had who else did they have? They had Mount Fiji, who was a Polynesian woman, and she
Was
looked
big.
Hawaiian, or big old Polynesian,
I
like
imagine.
great big, and she would go against Matilda the Hun, not Attila the Hun, Matilda the Hun.
And this is a
And it was
French.
these,
This is a French. Like I'm
yeah.
trying to mad like
Matilda
Attila
the
Hun and
Hun
Matilda.
she was like giving German. She would eat probably a turkey, like a great big meat thing, and she was dressed she had like fur thing, like a cave woman, but more updated, like from Germanic, I don't know, whatever. Anyway, these are the archetypes. Very, very racially. Could not do it today. Could not do it today. Could not do it today. They had Americana, and she was wearing the American flag, and she was the most beautiful. And she was just she would never do. I only fight for what's right. Like that was Americana.
Like Hulk Hogan, basically.
Yeah, but no, Hulk Hogan. Yeah, but she was even more emblematic than
like
Hulk
Captain
Hogan.
America, maybe.
Like Captain America. She was that person. And then they had who would come out and fight. They had a woman named Palestina. And she was just a terrorist.
That sounds like the Iron Sheik. That sounds like the Iron Sheik. The Iron Sheik was. Do you remember the Iron Sheik?
Yeah, I do remember the Iron Sheik. Palestina had a book bag, and she would get ready to bomb people. That's all she did.
God.
She didn't even wrestle. She just would have her bomb and ready to, and that was it. And they would always get her, you know. So like, obviously, they didn't really do a bomb.
Wild.
But that was it. That's all we knew. That was all we knew. So my view of Muslims, and first of all, I wasn't even making a connection to Palestina and Palestine. I was making a connection from Palestina, the terrorist wrestler, and all Muslims.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's all we ever got to. We were never given their humanity. We were never seeing more than just Muslims are terrorists. And that was by design.
It was so interesting too. You know, I didn't grow up around a lot of Middle Eastern Muslims. I grew up around a lot of Muslims, but they're all Nation of Islam Muslims. So I remember my growing up, the image I had of Muslims in my head was like a black guy who wears a beanie. Is like my brother, like selling bean pies.
Mm-hmm.
Bean pies, my brother.
You know, Louis Farrakhan.
Yeah, Louis Farrakhan was like the image of the Muslim in my head. So in 2001, after September 11th, the idea of a Muslim changed.
Was a different,
for me,
same.
It changed. I remember being like, "This is like they're not the bean pie, my brother Muslim.
They're not wearing a bow tie and glasses.
Yeah, it's like a whole different. And I remember I was from Georgia, so we didn't have a lot of where I live. We didn't have a lot of Middle Eastern people. But I remember just being like, I didn't even know that Muslims weren't black. I thought all Muslims were black.
Honestly, that's probably. I think I think people who wore turbans, who were brown skinned, in my experience and in my vision, and certainly in my life, that in my mind for sure, were Indian.
Yeah.
Like I knew of Indian folks, and I knew that some people would wear turbans, and so that was the all of the brown people who spoke with an accent in our culture were just ascribed to being Indian, or something of that nature, and kind of a catch-all for everybody who's brown from the East.
Very true.
And so they weren't giving representation. There was no positive representation, or like even a realistic presentation of someone from the Middle East. The last time we had that in American media culture was when Elizabeth, Cleopatra, diamonds. These diamonds have always brought me luck.
Elizabeth
Taylor. Elizabeth Taylor playing Cleopatra.
Or Peter O'Toole playing Lawrence of Arabia. Was it Peter O'Toole?
Oh, Lawrence of Arabia. Yeah.
Peter O'Toole? No.
Ben-Hur. Yeah. Well, these white actors playing these parts that were stories that were either biblical stories or stories out of either the Middle East / Northern Africa, and they were portrayed by white folks, and they would only portray like classically stories about like royalty and people, triumphant stories. So we didn't get to see the story of the average person and who they are, whether they were Middle Eastern or Muslim or both, because there's a lot of Christian Arab people, from the Middle East. We don't even hear about that. You know what I mean? Like, but this is literally where Jesus Christ was born. Yeah. You know what I mean?
It's crazy when
but we don't hear about that.
I knew about other cultures. I mean, when I moved to New York City and I saw I went to Pennsylvania and I saw an no.
Amish person?
No, when I
A
moved to
Mennonite?
New York
Oh.
City, I thought that Hasidic Jewish people were Amish, which
Oh,
an
when you
Amish.
saw somebody who is Hasidic,
I thought they were
you
Amish.
you
Like
you thought that was
now
an
I
Amish
know
person because
now
of
I know that an
there's
Amish
some
person
hats.
would probably not be living in New York City. That would probably be really tough to be Amish in New York City. But I thought Jewish people either were like a little yarmulke maybe, but other than that, I was like, oh, it's just like a Jerry Seinfeld, Jerry Seinfeld, Bette Midler, those people. So I remember being like, oh my god, I remember being like these Amish people. And someone was like, girl, those aren't Amish people. Those are Jewish people. I was like, what? That's crazy. And I was like 22 years old. So the American education system is
Is terrible.
it's in trouble because now they're getting rid of it. And I think Linda McMahon, Vince McMahon's wife, is in charge of the is going to be in charge. I can't even get into it. Should it be jazzy? That was a wrap on season 4. Boom, boom, boom. What an incredible journey this season has been. We've heard stories from icons. Ow! Explored deep conversations and celebrated the power of Black queer voices. I am just so like the fact that we are still chugging along on this a remarkable, amazing podcast, and all of you are on the journey with us. By the way, go over to iTunes, go over to Spotify. Please give us a review. It helps so much.
Absolutely. Yeah, we have had a lot from historical reflections to future visions. This season, when at the beginning of the season, we weren't quite sure exactly what we were going to do or how we were going to do it, when it was going to happen. And, I'm grateful that we were able to do it. And I think this is definitely one of our best seasons
I
for
agree.
sure.
I agree.
And it's been a testament to the strength and resilience of our community. And there's so many stories that are left to uncover. And we've learned so much about from our amazing guests and even from each other. And we are so grateful for all the people who listen to this. And one of the things we need the most, not to overstate it, is for you to share and talk about this season and the episodes. Share your favorite episodes with people, post clips about it. That's part of the reason why we have these videos, on YouTube. Y'all be clipping and posting pictures of us burping and whatever, then post some of these as well.
We've had some comments before. One time I was on Sibling Rivalry and me and Monet had like a white person on the podcast, and someone goes, "Do Bob and Monet ever have black people on their podcast?" Which the answer is overwhelmingly yes. By the way, me and Monet always have black people on our podcast. And then I was like, I have a podcast where every single person is black and queer. Like literally every single person who comes on is black and queer. And then we had a comment on those like
And
they
I bet
never
you that person didn't even know that.
Probably. And then someone came to the comment section of this podcast and was like, they never have trans men on the show. That's not true. We have trans men on our show. But maybe you didn't know, but I'm not mad at you. Maybe you just didn't know that episode. Maybe you didn't know those episodes existed. Maybe you didn't know those guests came and lent their voices. We've had some remarkable trans men, non-binary people, trans women, bisexual people. We will even allow cis straight men. I'm just kidding. No straight guys.
Cis white
But
straight men to
no, we
come
do not.
on
They're
to the
not. They're
show
not on the show. But we have
and
tons.
tell us what's what.
We have a lot of remarkable voices here. We've had just so tons and tons of remarkable voices I'm very proud that we have we really search and make sure that we have a diversified platform, that we platform a diversified community, because we are a diversified community. And
We
as we close
really
the season
are.
out, and
How many
listen,
guests do you think we've had over the years? Over
I
the
mean,
2 years?
roughly 2 an
Charlene.
episode, and it's about 8 episodes a season. So 8
10
times
episodes a
10
season.
episodes a
That's
season,
80
so 80
guests.
roughly, but some of them come back, so I'm bringing down like 70.
So we probably had
Over
so
80.
if we had at least 80 per season, then and that's been 4 seasons. So we've had over 300 and something guests. Oh,
No, that's that Maryland math.
how many guests have we had? If we have 80 guests in one season,
Roughly 80.
oh,
Let's just land on roughly 80. Don't fact check us.
we had lots and lots and lots of guests on. And so I want to know if you are a purist of Town Hall of Black Queer Podcast. Leave it in the comment right now, those of you that have actually listened to every single episode.
I
Who are
have.
you?
I have. Let me
I'm
count.
talking about the
I
yeah,
know.
but you've been in everyone.
I
I'm
know.
talking about the listeners. If you're a listener and you've listened to every single episode, let us know. Let us be known. Those of you, stand up and be proud and
Mhm.
be counted. We want to know who you are.
So, thank you all for joining us for all these for the amazing time. Take care, and we will catch you all in season 5.
It's true. And for the last time this season, thank you so much to our fabulous producers, executive producers Tracy Marquez and Charlene Westbrook, our producer Corey Nixon, our post producer Amelia Ritaler, and our fabulous music maestro for every single season, Miss LaFemme Bear. See y'all next time.
Thanks, everyone.